Hi, I'm Venitra. On Christmas Eve, I walked into my parents' house and saw something missing: my face, cropped cleanly out of the family portrait above the fireplace like I was never part of it. They called me just the guest, but the gifts under the tree were bought with my money. The purse my sister opened with fake surprise, charged to my account. No one looked ashamed. No one even looked surprised. So I gave them an envelope. Inside, everything they tried to erase. What happens when the daughter they edited out decides to edit herself back in? On her own terms? And what do you do when silence stops being protection and starts being a weapon? The tires crunched against the frozen gravel as I pulled into the driveway. The house looked exactly the same. Same string lights wrapping the porch columns, same red wreath on the door, and the same curtain pattern I'd memorized as a child. But stepping out of the car, I felt none of the warmth those memories used to bring. Snow clung to the soles of my boots as I crossed the walkway. The scent of pine and cinnamon drifted from inside, mingling with the distant sound of holiday jazz. It should have felt comforting, nostalgic even. Instead, it was like slipping into a costume that no longer fit. The front door opened before I could knock. Vervain stood there in her holiday sweater, a fixed smile stretching her face. "You made it," she said, stepping aside without a hug. Her perfume hit me instantly, floral, sharp, intentional. It smelled like cover-up. I walked in and scanned the foyer. The place had been redecorated again, everything curated, down to the angle of the throw pillows. The kind of home that looks perfect on Instagram but feels like a museum in real life. I moved toward the living room, shrugging off my coat. That's when I saw it. Above the fireplace, where our old family photo had always hung, was a newer, larger frame. The image was crisp, professionally done. Mother in her signature red blazer, Thorne beside her, with that forced half-smile, and Callista mid-laugh like someone had just told her a delightful joke. It was the kind of photo you'd use in a Christmas card campaign. But I wasn't in it. Not even off to the side, not blurred in the background. I had been edited out, cleanly. No jagged lines, no missing limbs in a poorly cropped mistake. Just gone. I stared at it for a long moment. No one said anything. No explanation followed. Not that I expected one. I let out a small breath and muttered, "Subtle." My voice didn't carry. That was fine. I dropped my overnight bag by the couch and sat back straight. The fireplace crackled softly. If I listened closely, I could almost hear the sound of my own absence echoing in that room. "You'll be sleeping in the guest room," Vervain called from the kitchen. "Not your room, not even the upstairs room. Guest." "Of course," I replied flatly. "Wouldn't want to take anyone's space." Thorin entered a moment later, barely looking up from his phone. "Traffic okay?" "It was fine," I said. That was the entire exchange. Then Callista came gliding in, her hair perfectly styled, holding a wine glass with a sprig of rosemary. "There she is," she sang, "all the way from Oregon. Welcome back to the nest." "The guest nest," I said, smiling without teeth. She giggled. "You know how Mom is with themes. Every room has one now. Yours is Scandinavian minimalism, very crisp." "Minimalism suits me," I said, and no one caught the bite behind it. Dinner was announced like an event. Vervain had prepared Cornish game hens, roasted vegetables, and a quinoa salad, her usual showcase of domestic perfection. She gestured me toward a seat at the far end of the table, away from the centerpiece and directly under the vent. "Make yourself comfortable," she said, as if comfort had ever been an option. Callista led the toast, of course. Something about gratitude and family and cherishing every moment. I didn't raise my glass. I sipped slowly, watching their performances unfold like a well-rehearsed skit. Halfway through the meal, Vervain glanced over. "So good to have everyone here, even our guest from Oregon." The table laughed, lightly, politely. Callista winked. I froze. "Guest? Guest, huh?" I said, placing my fork down. Good to know I should have booked a hotel. An awkward pause followed, broken only by the clink of Thorne's glass as he topped off his wine. No one apologized. No one corrected her. They weren't being careless. They were being clear. After dinner, I retreated to the guest room. It was exactly what you'd expect. Neutral colors, untouched linens, a scented candle already burning. The walls were bare. No sign that I'd ever lived in this house, ever laughed in its kitchen, ever cried in its halls. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the suitcase I hadn't unpacked. That photo above the fireplace wasn't an oversight. It was a statement. You don't belong here anymore. I lay back and stared at the ceiling fan, rotating in slow motion, each blade slicing the silence, like a clock hand counting down. They always said I was the strong one, the independent one. They built me that way, by forgetting birthdays, skipping recitals, losing track of where I lived or what I did. And I let them. I let them think I didn't need anything because I was tired of asking. Toni Morrison once wrote, "If you want to fly, you have to give up the things that weigh you down." I used to think she meant regrets. Now I think she meant people. And still, I stayed. One more night, one more chance. Even if deep down, I knew nothing would change. Morning sunlight filtered through the gauzy kitchen curtains, casting pale lines across the tile floor as I stepped into the dining room. The house was wide awake now, smelling of maple syrup and rosemary, sounding of cheerful jazz and polished laughter. The table was already set. Everything matched. Even the chaos here was curated. Callista stood near the buffet, barefoot in a silk robe like some lifestyle host giving tips for the perfect brunch setup. "These are homemade," she beamed, pointing to a plate of pancakes stacked like architecture. "Gluten-free, almond flour, local eggs. We've really elevated tradition." I glanced at the long table. Name cards marked every seat. Mom with a little holly leaf doodled on hers, Dad's printed in gold, and Callista's decorated with a glittery ribbon. There was one spot left. No card. Tucked in the far end, right near the back window where the draft slipped in from the old seal. I sat there without a word. Plates clinked. Chairs creaked. The two family friends invited for this picture-perfect holiday chatted animatedly with Callista about her trip to Tulum, her upcoming product line, and how her latest video had touched so many lives. I poured myself some coffee. No one noticed I hadn't eaten. A stack of gifts sat near the tree. As they were passed out, one box remained. Simple wrapping, no tag. Vervain picked it up and walked it over with a casual grace that said everything had been pre-planned. "We weren't sure you were coming," she said, her voice honey-sweet, "so we kept it neutral." I opened it slowly. Inside was a white ceramic mug. It read, in curling script, "Try not to take things personally." Callista burst out laughing. "That's hilarious," she said, turning to the others. "Come on, that's just funny." Even one of the guests chuckled politely. I looked at the mug, turned it once in my hands, then slid it back into the box. My face didn't move, but inside, I was archiving this moment, tucking it into the ever-expanding folder labeled Proof. I didn't respond. I didn't smile. I just made sure they saw me close the lid. We moved on. Conversations bloomed again, like nothing had happened. That's how these things go in families like ours. Someone plants a landmine, it explodes, and then everyone politely ignores the debris. Midway through brunch, another guest arrived. One of those distant friends of the family I hadn't seen since high school graduation. He was balding now, wearing an oversized coat and holding a bottle of sparkling cider. "Wow, it's been years," he said, greeting everyone warmly. When he reached me, he paused, visibly trying to place my face. "You must be Callista's cousin from out of town, right?" Vervain said nothing, just sipped her mimosa and pretended to be absorbed in slicing a scone. I smiled. Not the forced kind. The quiet, final kind. "No," I said evenly. "I'm the older daughter, the one they didn't label." His smile faltered. He nodded awkwardly and turned away. That was the moment it shifted. Not for them. For me. I wasn't speaking to be understood. I was speaking to confirm what I already knew. They didn't forget me. They erased me. And I'd finally stopped handing them the eraser. I excused myself from the table soon after, feigning fatigue. No one argued. Upstairs, I pushed open the door to what used to be my bedroom. It was now a makeshift storage space. Boxes of seasonal decor, a folded treadmill, and a few plastic bins labeled MISC lined the walls. The only remnant of my past was a small crack near the window pane, the one I used to trace with my finger when I couldn't sleep. I cleared a corner of the desk, set down my laptop, and opened a new folder on my desktop. I named it Reclaim. It wasn't poetic, but it was honest. One by one, I began pulling up old emails, financial statements, forgotten account notices, receipts I hadn't meant to ignore, but had. There were charges I didn't recognize, passwords I never changed, access logs that didn't match my own logins. I wasn't emotional. I was focused. Every detail I uncovered didn't surprise me. It confirmed me. And I realized something else. I wasn't here to heal a relationship. I was here to map a pattern. I wasn't looking for apologies anymore. I was collecting proof. Back downstairs, the air had changed. Brunch dishes were cleared, but the house remained frozen in its careful stillness. It wasn't quiet. Callista's voice still floated through the space, narrating her latest brand deal to whoever would listen. But something about the energy was sterile, like hospital lighting. Too bright, too controlled. I passed the coffee table on my way to the fireplace and paused. Someone had placed a photo album there. Leather-bound, thick, like it had weight, both literal and symbolic. The kind you leave out casually for guests, hoping someone will say, "Oh, what a beautiful family." I sat down slowly, lifted the cover, and began flipping. Page after page of beaming faces. Christmas mornings, beach vacations, graduations, weddings. Not mine, of course. Everything looked curated, softened with filters or polished lighting. There were shots I recognized because I'd taken them, angles I'd framed, moments I'd paused time to preserve. But my face never appeared, not once. Not even in the background, not a blurred shoulder, not a misplaced hand. They hadn't just stopped including me. They had removed me, meticulously. I leaned back, let the album rest on my lap, and stared at the fireplace. It was still crackling gently, the way it always did. Familiar. Like it hadn't noticed anything had changed. I'd lived those years, but they'd edited them into a version where I didn't exist. Dinner prep began soon after. Callista buzzed around, placing name cards at each setting, her voice light and performative. I stayed seated, watching. There were names for everyone, even the family friend who dropped by for dessert. No card for me. Verraine walked past me, pausing briefly when she noticed my eyes following her. "You're fine there, sweetheart," she said, pointing to a chair near the swinging door to the kitchen, right next to the trash bin. "It's less crowded." It wasn't about space, it was about proximity, to power, to acknowledgement, to being part of the circle. I stood, took the card from Thorin's spot. He wasn't there yet, and moved it. Placed it at the end of the table. Sat down. No one said a word, which told me everything. After dinner, as the dishes were rinsed and dried in coordinated rhythm, I wandered into the den. It was quiet, dimly lit by a single floor lamp, dust motes floating lazily in the warm air. I opened a cabinet I hadn't touched in years. Inside, half buried under a stack of faded wrapping paper and a few tangled strings of lights, was a thumb drive labeled in Verraine's cursive, Family Archive. I took it upstairs, plugged it into my laptop. The folder opened to hundreds of images, scanned Polaroids, digitized VHS stills, and carefully organized year-by-year albums. It should have been comforting. It wasn't. As I clicked through, something eerie emerged. Photos I remembered taking were there. I recalled where I was standing, what I said to make them smile. But in the saved versions, I had been cropped out. Some of them so carefully edited, you'd think I never stood behind that lens. Even the captions, originally written in my messy script, had been retyped in Callista's chirpy tone. Beach day with the best fam ever. Nothing like Mom's Christmas brunch. My words had been rewritten, my point of view replaced, my authorship deleted. I didn't disappear. They just reframed the story until I no longer fit. Back at the desk, I copied the entire drive onto my laptop, then a second copy onto the cloud, not out of spite, out of preservation. I wasn't trying to prove anything to them anymore, but I knew what families like mine did best: deny, delay, delete. So I documented. I went back into my folder, reclaim, and added new entries. Visual manipulation, album plus digital archive, timeline gaps. Emotional pattern, non-inclusion across events. Witnesses, passive observers, complicit in erasure. It wasn't about being petty, it was about patterns. This wasn't new behavior, it was just newly undeniable. Later that evening, I reviewed my old financial email again, this time with sharper eyes, timestamps, account pings, device activity. My digital footprint had been tampered with before. This was simply another layer. As I scrolled, I thought about how truth doesn't always scream. Sometimes it whispers. In photos cropped without comment, in chairs placed near trash cans, in albums where you vanish frame by frame. I wasn't fighting a mistake. I was fighting a narrative. You can't challenge a story that doesn't include you, unless you write your own. Dinner came with the kind of presentation you see on cooking shows. Plates rimmed in gold, sprigs of rosemary tucked into folded napkins, Callista narrating each course like she was hosting a seasonal special. If anyone noticed I hadn't changed out of my jeans and sweater, they didn't mention it. The gift exchange started shortly after dessert. Callista insisted we open presents in order, which, unsurprisingly, meant she went first. With exaggerated grace, she tore into a box wrapped in deep burgundy foil. Inside, a designer handbag. One I recognized from a boutique window back in Portland. I remembered glancing at it once. Just once. She gasped theatrically. "Oh my God, you guys," she said, turning to Verain and Thorin with that breathy, I'm so humbled smile. "This is... wow!" Verain reached out to squeeze her hand. "We thought it was time you had something special." Thorin nodded, sipping wine. The moment lingered, like they expected applause. Then a small paper slipped from the box. A folded receipt. I leaned forward just enough to catch it before it touched the floor. Unfolded it. Stared. My name, my bank, my card. They'd used my money. I turned the slip toward the light. Double-checked the date. Recent, less than 3 weeks ago. While I was paying rent and skipping groceries, they were swiping my card for Callista's photo op accessory. No one made eye contact. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't slam the paper down. I just said, steady as a lawyer in closing argument, "Funny, I didn't know I was still your bank." Callista didn't even blink. "Don't make this about you. You weren't even using that card." Verain gave a small laugh. "It's Christmas, Venitra. Let's not ruin it." I folded the receipt in half, then in half again, and tucked it into my back pocket. "Don't worry, I'm not the one ruining anything." Later that night, after the laughter had moved into the other room, I found myself in the kitchen alone. The sink had been cleaned. The candles were out, but the trash hadn't been taken out yet. I opened the lid. Among the wrappers and paper towels were torn pieces of other receipts. I started pulling them out, assembling the puzzle on the granite countertop like I'd done this before, which in a way I had. Charges to stores I'd never visited, brands I'd never worn, gifts I'd never given, but apparently had funded. All linked to my secondary account, one I'd given Verain access to years ago during a medical scare. I'd forgotten to revoke it. They hadn't. I took photos of each piece, smoothing the crumpled bits flat and capturing every line item. Then I placed them in an envelope, sealed it, and wrote one word on the front. Evidence. I didn't need revenge. I needed records. The dining room still glowed. Callista was showing off the bag again to one of the guests who'd lingered. Verain was laughing like this was the best Christmas yet. Thorin was nodding along, half listening as always. I walked back to the threshold, wineglass in hand, full but untouched. "Let me be clear," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the room like a knife through meringue. "This isn't about a bag or a receipt. This is about value, mine. You don't get to erase me and spend me too." Callista opened her mouth to speak, but nothing came out. I turned without waiting for a reply and walked upstairs, each step deliberate. In my old room, still bare, still labeled guest, in every sense, I closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a long breath. They could have asked. They could have said thank you. But they hadn't. Because in their story, I didn't matter enough to include. And that, more than the money, more than the lies, that was what cost the most. The door to the guest room clicked shut behind me, but I didn't sit down. I didn't cry, either. I just stood there, still holding the glass of wine I'd brought up, still untouched. The burgundy liquid shimmered in the low lamplight like it was waiting for something too. Maybe a toast, maybe a truth. Dinner was called not long after. I set the glass down, smoothed my sleeves, and headed downstairs. I wasn't hungry, but showing up was half the point. I didn't want them to pretend I was sulking. I wanted them to see me walk in. The table was perfection, of course. Tall tapers flickered in antique holders. The scent of roasted poultry and rosemary floated through the room like a designer fragrance. Verain was fussing with napkin folds. Thorin had already poured wine for the guest next to him, and Callista was mid-laugh before I even entered the room. I took my seat quietly. No one greeted me. Then the dishes came out, each like an unveiling. Roasted carrots with honey glaze, wild rice with pomegranate seeds, and at the center of it all, Callista's favorite, walnut rosemary chicken salad. Her eyes lit up like she was seeing an old lover. "Oh my God, yes," she breathed. "This. Mom, you outdid yourself." Verain beamed. "You always loved this one." I looked at my plate and froze. Walnuts. Not pecans, not almonds. Walnuts. I was allergic, severely, always had been. Every family dinner growing up had an alternate dish for me. Every restaurant choice came with a call ahead. There had even been an incident once when I was 12 that ended in an ER visit. But tonight? Nothing. No substitution. No mention. "You can just eat around the nuts, dear," Verain said breezily, as if she'd anticipated the hesitation. Callista smirked. "It's not a crime to like what you like." I pushed the plate aside and reached for a slice of plain bread. No one asked why. They remembered what she liked. They forgot what could kill me. Conversation turned quickly to lighter things. Aspen, flights, new boots. Callista's voice bounced from topic to topic, like a practice speech. Then Verain chimed in. "It was a bit tight this year, but everyone pitched in to help her get there." "Even Big Sis helped," Callista added, lifting her wineglass in my direction. "Right, Venny?" Thorin chuckled, raised his glass. "Team effort." I didn't say a word, but I recognized the transaction. It had posted 2 days before her trip. A charge to my backup card, the one I forgot they had access to. I had canceled it last night. They weren't even hiding it, just repackaging theft as sentiment. I could have let it go. I really could have. But not after the nuts. Not after the receipt. Not after watching them look through me like furniture. I cleared my throat. "You know," I said, gently tapping my glass with my fork, "if you're going to spend my money, at least send a thank you note." The room fell quiet. Callista's face went flat. "You always make everything about you. You're not the only one who exists," she added, her tone sharpening. Verain jumped in. "We're a family. We share things. You're too sensitive." "Sharing without permission isn't love," I replied. "It's entitlement." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I stood. My chair made the smallest creak as it moved back, louder in the silence than any scream. I'm done playing the invisible donor, I said. You want someone to bankroll your fantasies? Find a new number to call. I didn't wait for them to process it. I walked out of that dining room and didn't look back. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was a strategy. By the time I reached the landing, the house had grown louder again. Callista's laughter echoing off the walls, the clinking of dessert forks, the hum of another round of music from the Bluetooth speaker. I didn't stop in the room. I didn't even close the door all the way. I just stood there for a moment, long enough to hear my name not being mentioned in a conversation downstairs. Then I came back down. I took the long way to the den, past the hallway mirror, the curated family coat rack, the neatly stacked shoes, none of which were mine. The only trace of me was the set of car keys in my pocket. They were gathered around the television now, Vervain standing like a conductor about to cue an orchestra. She pressed a button on the remote, and the projector flickered to life. It cast a soft glow against the blank wall, dust catching the light like a quiet storm. "This is always my favorite part," she said to the guests, "a little trip down memory lane." The slideshow began. Christmas mornings blurred one into the next. Snowmen, matching pajamas, hand-decorated cookies. Clip after clip rolled by, edited with transitions, overlaid with royalty-free piano music. All of it polished to perfection. All of it. Without me. In one clip, they're opening stockings. I remember standing just outside the frame, holding a camera, laughing when Thorin dropped his orange into the dog's water bowl. In this version, there's no voice behind the lens. There's no lens. There's just absence. A guest, seated near the edge of the couch, leaned toward Vervain and whispered, "Didn't you used to have another daughter?" Vervain didn't flinch. She smiled, eyes still on the screen. "She's here, somewhere. Somewhere. Not. She's right there." Not even a glance in my direction, just a shrugging off. I didn't respond. I didn't even look at her. I watched the rest of the slideshow like I was watching a documentary about a family I'd never known. Familiar architecture, unfamiliar casting. When it ended, there was light applause. Callista turned on another lamp. Vervain carried in a tray of peppermint bark and hot cocoa, passing cups with names written in metallic ink. Each person received a cloth napkin, hand-embroidered. Thorin's with a stitched golf club, Vervain's with a red cardinal, Callista's with a scripted C and a tiny star. Even the dogs had a bone pattern. Mine was plain, white, nothing. I picked it up, unfolded it slowly, then refolded it with the same care. I placed it back on the table. "You can keep this one," I said, voice low but clear. "It fits your narrative better." Callista rolled her eyes. Vervain turned away like she hadn't heard. Thorin sipped his drink, eyes glued to the fireplace. I pushed back from the table and stood. I walked out of the room. Upstairs again, I didn't turn on the light. The glow from the laptop screen was enough. I sat down and opened my desktop folder, created a subfolder titled Timeline. Inside it, I dropped screenshots of my credit card statements, date-stamped files, email logs, everything they'd used without my consent. I opened another document and titled it, For Them. Not yet. It was time-stamped automatically. I wasn't going to post it. I wasn't going to call a family meeting, but I was going to be ready. Ready for when the denial came. Ready for the inevitable claims of, "We didn't know," or "You're reading too much into it," because they weren't erasing me by accident. They were erasing me because it made the story cleaner, easier to sell. But I had the receipts. If they were writing me out of the story, I was writing the ending myself. I woke up to a vibration under my pillow. My phone, screen still lit, was flooded with notifications. Texts, tags, and a familiar ache that had nothing to do with sleep. My finger hovered over the screen. I already knew what I'd see before I tapped. Callista's latest post greeted me like a punch to the throat. A perfectly angled selfie, her in front of the tree, coffee in one hand, wrapped in a faux fur throw. The caption read, "So grateful to be surrounded by the people who always lift me up." Some people choose distance over love, and that's their story. I choose peace. 30,000 likes. The comments were the usual parade of performative sympathy. You're the strong one, girl. You don't need that negativity. Family can be so toxic, stay glowing. My name wasn't mentioned. It didn't need to be. I took a screenshot, then another of the comment section. Not because I needed to remember, but because patterns matter. I dropped both into the Reclaim folder under Narratives. This wasn't just dysfunction anymore. This was marketing. I wasn't blocked from the post. That would have been too obvious. No, she wanted me to see it, to scroll past it, to sit with it. I turned off the screen. The silence in the guest room was heavier now, thicker. I pulled on my sweater and stepped into the hallway. The house was still asleep, save for the faint hum of the heating vent and the ticking of the hallway clock. I made my way to the bathroom at the end of the hall. The mirror greeted me before the light did. Written across the glass in what looked like soap, or maybe the leftover residue from a dry erase marker, were the words, "Some people just can't stand not being the center of attention." No signature, but I didn't need one. It wasn't Callista's handwriting. It was neater. Controlled. Verraine. I stood there for a moment, letting the message soak into my reflection. Then I reached for a tissue, wiped it clean in 2 quick strokes. The glass gleamed again. Blank. Indifferent. With the pad of my finger, I wrote something small in the corner. Silence is strategy. It wasn't meant to be read. It was meant to be left behind. I washed my hands, dried them slowly, then walked back down the hallway. Not to confront anyone. Not yet. I returned to the guest room, opened my laptop, and clicked back into the Reclaim folder. A new set of subfolders went in. Transactions. Edits. Inheritance. Narratives. I wasn't writing a diary. I was building a case. Each screenshot got its place. Each document, a name. For every lie told out loud, I stored a truth in silence. There was no grand plan to expose them. No press conference, no family showdown. I didn't want an audience, but I wanted accuracy. That morning, Verraine posted a photo of the breakfast spread on Facebook. "Love in every detail," the caption read. The plate in the photo was mine. The seat I'd refused. The mug I hadn't touched. I added it to staged moments. People believe what they see. I made sure I had both versions. By mid-morning, Callista was live on Instagram, talking softly about letting go of hurt, about choosing joy, while subtle tears glistened beneath the ring light. Her voice cracked at just the right pitch. The comments flooded in. "Don't let her bring you down. You've done nothing wrong. Some people just want to be victims." I watched in silence, then clicked record. I wasn't capturing her. I was capturing the gap between performance and history. She ended with, "Sometimes you just have to move on without closure." I closed the tab. No comment, no share, no message. Instead, I opened a document titled Inheritance and began listing property values, transfer dates, legal contacts. A separate tab held voice memos I'd saved over the years, conversations where I'd been told, "It's not about money. You're overthinking. We'll circle back." I listened to a few. Then I added dates, summaries, cross-referenced them with receipts. I wasn't the ghost, I typed at the top of the file. I was the historian. And when they finally asked for my side of the story, I wasn't going to argue. I was going to send them a folder. The lights downstairs were already on by the time I zipped my coat and headed toward the staircase. From the hallway, I could hear Callista's voice rising above the polite chatter of extended family and neighbors. Her cadence rehearsed, her laughter perfectly spaced between stories. The gift exchange was about to begin, the performance part of the day. I paused at the top step. My breath caught for a second, not from nerves, but calculation. Then I descended slowly, not because I needed the theatrics, but because I deserved to be seen arriving on my own terms. The living room glowed with seasonal abundance. Pillows fluffed, candles lit, ribbon-wrapped boxes stacked symmetrically near the fireplace. Veraine stood front and center in her deep green blouse, holding a tray of cranberry spritzers like a hostess at a holiday catalog shoot. Thorin nodded from his seat, half in, half checked out, like always. I slipped through the room toward the hallway on the left. No one stopped me. No one asked where I was going. Just past the coat closet was the wall of family achievements, framed with soft white trim, lit from above by a small gallery spotlight. I'd seen it before, but never studied it the way I did now. Photos of Callista at her high school graduation, at a gallery opening, mid-laugh with Veraine, a framed invitation to her latest art show in Denver, even a local newspaper clipping about her rising social media impact, pride in pastel frames. And on the bottom row, next to a photo of our dog in a Halloween costume, was my law school diploma. Cropped. No date, no ceremony, just the document. Bare. No mention of the national award I'd won last year. No picture from the TEDx event I'd flown myself to. Not even a candid shot. Legacy was never the issue, I whispered to myself. Visibility was. I walked upstairs again, this time without guilt. In the hallway linen drawer, half pulled open, I spotted a small stack of old greeting cards and receipts. Something made me stop. Under a faded Christmas card, addressed to my favorite, was a folded yellowed note. Veraine's handwriting was unmistakable. Callista will take the family forward. Venitra will always land on her feet. She doesn't need us. Dated 3 years ago. The same year, I asked for a bridge loan after a contract fell through, and was told, "We're a little strapped ourselves." I took a photo of the note, then folded it slowly and slid it into my coat pocket. Downstairs, Callista was holding up a large framed print. The crowd applauded. Flashbulbs went off. The print read, "The heart of our home. Callista, forever our light." More clapping. I stepped into the room just as they were handing her a pen to sign the back. I said nothing. I walked straight to the coffee table, set the white envelope I'd labeled, "For them." Not yet. In the center of the holiday spread, and turned to walk away. "What's this?" Thorin asked, frowning. Veraine leaned forward. I kept walking. "Documentation," I said evenly. "Receipts, ownership transfers, messages you hoped were never found." The room fell completely silent. Consider this the first real family portrait. No one followed me as I crossed the room. Not a word came after me. And that, more than anything, told me I had timed it right. They didn't touch the envelope at first. It just sat there in the middle of the coffee table, wedged between a stack of untouched gingerbread cookies and a glossy magazine with Callista on the cover. The room was still draped in the scent of cinnamon and wood polish, but the warmth had evaporated. I stood just inside the archway, watching them try to decide who would open it. It was Veraine who reached for it, not because she wanted to, but because the silence had shifted, heavy now with expectation, with threat. She peeled the seal slowly, too slowly. I could see her eyes scanning the first page, then the second. Her fingers began to tremble. Thorin leaned over her shoulder, brows furrowing. Callista was frozen, wineglass still in hand, the smile on her lips slowly collapsing. There it was. The original will. Grandpa's signature, the notary stamp, everything in order. The house, the one we were sitting in, was mine. Not ours, not family estate. Mine. Veraine cleared her throat. This can't be right. He left it to the family, to all of us. I stepped forward, but not close. Just enough that she had to look up. You changed the password to his cloud account 3 days after the funeral, I said. You deleted the folder labeled Final Wishes, but you forgot about the archive my lawyer had on file. Dated, notarized, witnessed. She paled but held her ground. He told us everything was to be shared. He just didn't update. Stop, I cut in. You hoped I'd never look. You counted on me disappearing quietly, like I always did. Thorin finally spoke, voice lower than usual. It's just a house. Then why lie about it? He had no answer. Callista blinked, like someone had turned a spotlight on her. I didn't know, I swear. I turned to her slowly. You didn't ask. That's the problem. None of you ever ask. There was a long pause. I thought we were a team, Thorin added. We had to make decisions. Things were tight. I faced him fully. You promised me the cabin on the lake. Remember that? You said it was mine if I helped you refinance. You looked me in the eye and said, "This family takes care of its own." His jaw worked silently before he muttered, "We needed options. We didn't think you'd want it." You didn't think I mattered, I corrected. You made that choice for me. Callista took a step forward. Look, this is all a misunderstanding. Mom didn't mean... I raised a hand. Not yelling, just... Done. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is a pattern. From the corner of the room, the family friend who'd stayed quiet this whole time finally spoke. This is theft, she said. Calm, blunt. Inheritance fraud. Varane's mouth tightened. You don't know the history. The friend looked at her evenly. I just saw the evidence, and I won't forget it. No one moved. I nodded once. No drama, no flourish. I'm not here to argue, I said. Just to close the book. I turned and walked out of the house. The front door creaked softly behind me as I stepped into the snow. The wind had picked up. It was sharp but clean, like it was clearing something out of the air. They could keep the decorations, the tree, the matching stockings. They could pose for photos next year and tell whatever story they wanted. But now, they'd have to tell it without me. And without the house. I drove through town with the windows half down. Not for the air, too cold for comfort, but because I needed something real to touch my face. Something not curated or softened or followed by a fake smile. By the time I parked at the small inn I'd booked on the other side of Boulder, the sun had just started to rise over the hills. Pale gold light stretched across rooftops, too honest to lie. I sat in the car for a moment, keys still in the ignition, watching condensation fade from the windshield. Inside, the room was small, basic, but it didn't smell like tension. There were no scripted smiles, no layers of quiet expectation, just silence. Honest, unpolished silence. I checked my phone as I slid my suitcase into the corner. 7 emails, 5 from Varane, 2 from Thorin, and 1 tagged post from Callista that I already knew I shouldn't open, but did anyway. The caption read, "Money doesn't buy family, it only rents revenge." The photo? A childhood picture of the 3 of us, me, Callista, and a dog we'd had for one summer before giving it away. Cropped so my face was barely visible. The comments, as always, rolled in fast. "Stay strong, Queen." "She's just jealous." Some people cut themselves out. I stared at the screen. Not shocked, just confirmed. I didn't reply. I didn't post my version. I just flagged it for documentation and moved on. Varane's emails were worse. "Let's not let this destroy us. You've always been so strong. Family should stick together, not tear each other apart." Words that read like apologies, but weren't. Only one message stood out, Thorin's. Subject: "We may need to sell the condo." Just that. I filed it into the folder marked Consequences. Later that morning, I walked to a cafe downtown. I ordered black coffee, no room, and chose a table by the window. The kind of table people pick when they want to be alone, but still visible. I pulled out my phone again, scrolled through old bank statements, watched the slow tick of my savings account on the screen. It was enough. Not comfortable, not luxurious, but enough. My phone buzzed. Ira Lynn. "You did it," she said, skipping a greeting. "You did what none of us ever dared to. You put truth above illusion." "I didn't expect the silence afterward," I replied. "It's always quiet after a building falls. That doesn't mean it wasn't necessary." We didn't talk long, We didn't need to. She reminded me that sanity didn't have to be loud to be solid. That distance wasn't always abandonment. It could be protection. After we hung up, I sipped my coffee, watching a mother across the street help her toddler out of a puffy jacket. She kissed his forehead and laughed at something he said. The kind of moment people post online, not for memory, but performance. But this one, it looked real. I pulled out my notebook and began to write. Not receipts this time, not timelines. Just thoughts. What I'd learned. What I wouldn't accept again. What I owed to myself now that I'd reclaimed what was mine. Not just a house. My story. My peace. Taking it back wasn't spite. It was survival. The morning after the storm always feels quieter than it should. I opened the curtains in my new home and let the light flood in. The windows still smelled faintly of fresh sealant. The floor creaked in a way that wasn't familiar yet, but it was mine. All of it. I stood in the middle of the living room, coffee in hand, wearing a sweater that didn't match anything but comfort. No more stockings, no curated tree, just a house that didn't lie about who it belonged to. A knock at the door startled me. It wasn't loud, just 3 quick, almost polite taps. I opened it to find my new neighbor, an older woman in a worn fleece coat, holding a basket of muffins and looking slightly nervous. "Hope I'm not interrupting," she said. "Just thought I'd welcome you properly." I thanked her, took the basket, and offered her a seat on the porch bench. We talked briefly, weather, street noise, the usual. Then she paused and said, almost too casually, "I saw your sister's post. Didn't know they left you out. But I'm glad you're back. That house needed someone real in it." I smiled. Not because it healed anything, but because someone had finally said the thing no one inside that house ever would. I didn't need validation, I thought as she walked away. But truth always finds its own echo. When I returned inside, there was a letter waiting on the small table near the door. I hadn't noticed it before. No return address, but the handwriting gave it away immediately. Verraine. 2 pages. Handwritten. No envelope. Just folded in half like she couldn't decide whether it deserved formality. I read it standing up. "We thought you were too strong to need us. You always seemed so capable. Callista's struggling now. We didn't expect you to be so cold." It wasn't an apology. It was a justification, a rewriting, a subtle plea for permission to feel okay about what they'd done by pretending they meant something else. I didn't cry. I folded the letter, walked it upstairs, and slid it into the drawer I'd labeled months ago, long before any of this unfolded, marked unanswered. It joined the others. I closed it softly. That afternoon, Ireland stopped by. She knocked like she always did. Twice, pause, then a third. Her rhythm, her honesty, her presence. I opened the door, and she walked in without saying anything. We made tea together in silence, moved around each other like people who didn't need to ask how the other was doing, because they already knew. She noticed the open box of seeds on the counter. "You finally starting that garden?" "Thought I'd try rosemary first," I said. "Full circle." She smiled and glanced around the house. "You made this a home faster than they ever made you one." I leaned against the counter. "Because it's mine. Finally." We sat outside as the sun dropped behind the trees. The air had a bite to it, but not enough to send us back in. The sky was soft gray, and for the first time in months, I wasn't scanning for storm clouds. Ireline didn't stay long. She never did. But before she left, she placed her hand over mine. "You didn't lose them," she said. "You released them." After she drove away, I walked back inside, barefoot against the wood floors I'd picked out myself. The fridge hummed. A light flickered in the hallway, which I made a note to fix. Life had returned to the simplest tasks, and with every passing moment, I realized more and more. Closure didn't come from their remorse. It came from my refusal to need it anymore. The first week of January in Boulder is quiet. Streets are still speckled with bits of snow hardened into gray slush. Holiday lights flicker half-heartedly on porches that feel less festive now. I sipped my tea at the kitchen window and watched my breath briefly cloud the glass before disappearing. It was the kind of peace I used to envy in other people's lives. The ordinary kind. A moving box sat in the corner, the last one. I hadn't opened it yet, not out of dread, just delay. The kind of delay that comes when you no longer feel rushed to prove anything. Inside, tucked in between bubble wrap and an old candle holder, was the ceramic frame I'd once given Vervain. A gift for her birthday, back when I still believed that giving meant something. It was still in its original packaging, untouched. I took it out, unwrapped it slowly, and walked it over to the window ledge. It looked different here, smaller maybe, or maybe just more honest. I pulled a photo from my desk drawer, one I'd taken weeks ago. Me, standing in front of this very house, keys in hand, alone, but not lost. I slid the picture into the frame and adjusted it so it faced the light. They discarded what they didn't value. I reclaimed it because I did. Later that morning, I found a card in the mailbox. Handwritten, no return name, just the apartment number. "Thank you," it read, "for treating us like people, not placeholders." I smiled without realizing it. That tenant had only lived upstairs for 2 months. I'd lowered their rent by $50 after finding out they were taking care of a parent in hospice. No announcement, no praise, just decency. That card meant more than any letter Vervain could have written. That same afternoon, I walked through each room of the house, my house. The walls had been repainted, the curtains replaced, every drawer had been cleaned. There were no more dusty holiday boxes labeled Callista's keepsakes, no more faded picture frames with missing names. In the den, I lit a candle and sat on the couch with my journal. The room felt bigger now, not because I'd added anything, but because I'd stopped shrinking to fit it. On the mantel, I'd placed one photo, just one. It was me, holding a coffee mug that now read, in gold script, "Center of my own life." The group email came that evening. From Vervain. Subject: "Hope you're doing well." I didn't open it. I didn't delete it either. I simply archived it, filed away under unnecessary. The truth was, I didn't need them to check in. I needed space. I needed air. And I'd found both. They'd asked for family. I'd asked for honesty. Only one of us got what we wanted. And it wasn't them. I stood at the window that night, watching the wind bend the branches outside. A few leftover lights still blinked on a neighbor's porch across the street. Everything felt quieter. Not hollow, just still. Closure didn't arrive in a single moment. It showed up in details, in the right kind of silence, in being able to fall asleep without planning your next defense. I turned off the lights, walked upstairs, brushed my teeth with the radio playing in the background, folded laundry in pajama pants that didn't match, set my alarm, not for court or confrontation, but for a run by the lake in the morning. I had plans. None of them required anyone's permission. Love that you earn isn't love. It's labor. I stopped working for what should have been free.